Final Fantasy IX isn't just one of my favorite Final Fantasy games. It's one of my favorite video games and pieces of art that I've ever had the opportunity to experience. I first played Final Fantasy IX way back in high school, about 12 years ago at this point. And I've replayed it a few times since, and every time I've replayed it, it still hits me in new ways. And I feel like every time I play it, there's this sense of me that's always like, I think I fully understand it, no need to go back to this. And every time I play it, I'm proven wrong. There's always something for me to experience. It still hits me emotionally in ways that some games, even to this day, don't even do. And it has this like Ghibli-like charm, and it's quite profound, right? It tackles a lot of themes, some around morality, identity, and what it means, I feel like, to live with intention. Now, I'm not saying that Final Fantasy IX is the only game in the series, or honestly, any only video game that has these themes. I feel like there's a lot of games that have this theme of morality and what it means to live with intention. But Final Fantasy IX does it in such a way that I just feel like is, for me, unmatched. And today I'm going to be talking about why. First, let's go and talk about its theme. Its theme is really about life, death, and living intentionally, right? I talked about that a little bit earlier. I talked about how even some games, one of the most popular Final Fantasy games, Final Fantasy VII, that is the most popular, that talks about living as well. Like there's a good life and death kind of analogy in that game, but I feel like that game was more about like letting go of those who have passed and understanding like the circle of life. Final Fantasy IX is a little bit different though, because I feel like while Final Fantasy VII is about letting go of someone that passed, Final Fantasy IX is about living in the current moment. And if I think about the characters that really express this message really well, like everyone's going to talk about Vivvie, and Vivvie is obviously going to be a character that expresses this really well. Now, if you haven't played the game, I'm not going to go into too much spoilers because I do want you to experience this. But, Vivvie is a character that is so innocent and just trying to understand his place in the world. And when he goes through a few revelations throughout the story, he starts to question, is like, what is the meaning of life? Like, what's the purpose of living if we all die someday? And I think that kind of message, just in general, especially coming from a character that's supposed to be like 9 years old, is very profound. I actually have a experience from when I was younger, and I went up to my mother and I actually told her how I was like scared to die. I related to Vivvie a lot in that sense because I was like, man, I don't want to die. Like, that's not something I want. But at the time as a child, you don't really process that, and you don't know what living with intention really means up to that point because you haven't really lived long. And I felt like Final Fantasy IX, through Vivvie's story, without spoiling it, captured that really, really well. And it's a reoccurring theme, right? It's what does it mean to live? What makes life meaningful? And there's a contrast between, a constructed purpose versus a chosen purpose too. Like a constructed purpose being like a purpose that's given to you upon birth, or by, in some cases when I try to relate it into my personal life, like a family member, or by society. And the chosen purpose is like, I've lived life with enough experience now. I've gone out into the world and formed my own experiences to finally figure out what do I want out of my own life? But that only comes of coming out of your comfort zone and figuring that out for yourself, which I also think this game tackles really well with other characters like Steiner, who's sheltered by his castle, and Garnet as well, sheltered by the castle and the kingdom that they're coming from. And it's not until they experience life that they fully understand, how they want to live it. And so when I think about other characters, like even the main character of Zidon, like because of how much life experience he's had and how much he's learned in the world, he actually embodies this message really, really well. And I find Zidon to be a really, really interesting main character. He's very, very flawed. And that's one thing I really love about him. But I feel like the way he lives is so honest, and it's so within intention, and it's so himself. And he's never afraid to show that. So even though I think Vivvie is like the heart and soul of the game, I feel like Zidon is really like a warm, empathetic character. And there's even a moment in the game where he breaks, but because he's formed so many great relationships in his life, and with amongst his friends, because of the personality he is, even when he does break, he has people to pull him out of it, which is in stark contrast to the main villain, who is Kuja, who actually doesn't form any relationships, and when he breaks, he has no one to take him out of that. And when I also think about just world building in the game, right? Building in Final Fantasy IX is, top class. I don't know of a lot of games that make me feel like the world is lived in before I arrived in it. And what I mean by that is, in a lot of RPGs, right? It's like the whole game revolves around you and your presence. All the NPCs that you talk to are there to serve you. I felt like there are some games that do a good job in making a world feel lived in, right? Some of those games, in my opinion, are like Oblivion. Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask is a really good one because of the way that it, tackles like the system where, everyone has their own routine throughout the day. And I think those two games have made me feel that way. But another game that has that, and I think honestly the only Final Fantasy game to this day that has ever made me feel that way is Final Fantasy IX. The NPCs all have things that they're doing, and as the story progresses, they react to the world around them, but without, talking to you directly as like, oh, player, like, did you see this? Maybe you should try talking to this person. Or it's literally they're in their own world. They have their own, things going on. And it makes the world feel like inhabited, it's not just designed for you, it's designed for the world building. And even when you think about like merchants and everything like that, even the merchants have their things going on. The innkeepers have their things going on. They all feel like they're a part of something bigger. And that's something I just deeply, deeply appreciate about this game. It really tackles those themes really well. Now, another thing that is, one thing that I really like about other Final Fantasy games in the series, like 10 and 7, is they kind of tackle what it means to be, to live in a fantasy world. One of the reasons why Final Fantasy X setting is so unique, and one of the reasons why I love that game, is because the setting is almost set in a way where main developers of the game would actually get letters like, oh, when are you going to go back to a medieval Final Fantasy? And his response was like, well, like, what makes you think that's the only type of fantasy that exists? So he thought about making fantasy more like an Asian fantasy. And I think that's a very inspiring way to do that. However, even though this goes back to a medieval type of Final Fantasy, it still feels very unique in a lot of ways. In a lot of ways, it feels more like a fairy tale or like a Ghibli film. There's a lot of like warm and charming elements to it that I feel really help elevate the setting, even if it's like medieval. Like, it feels distinctly different from like something like Elder Scrolls or like Lord of the Rings. It feels like its own thing. And even when I look at the world, like, the pre-rendered backgrounds are gorgeous. Like, to this day, I don't think I've ever seen better pre-rendered backgrounds. I think the closest I saw was maybe Fantasian, but even then that's kind of cheating because those backgrounds are like real, like they're actual real life dioramas that Hironobu Sakaguchi made for that game. This is just completely designed, but man, does it look beautiful. Every time I go, I'm just in awe. Like, I think even just looking at Lindblom alone, that I think is like the best town I've ever seen in any RPG I think I've ever played. Like, it's lived in, there's so much detail, so many things going on. Each area has an atmosphere, and it goes in service without breaking the tone. Let's quickly talk about gameplay, because that's important for a game like this too. So the gameplay is also like classic Final Fantasy in a lot of ways, where, the characters each have their own class. It's not like Final Fantasy 7 or 8 or even 6 to an extent where anyone could learn everything. Even then with 7, even though, for example, in 7, Cloud could be like a mage user, it doesn't make the most sense because like base stats won't go with it. So it kind of encourages you to not give him as much like magic and to really focus on his strength. However, if you wanted to, you have the option. In Final Fantasy 9, each character has their own strength, and it is what it is, right? If you want a mage user, you get Aiko, you get Garnet, you get Vivvie. Those are your mage users, right? If you want a knight, you want a thief, you use Zidon, you use Steiner. Everyone has their own purpose, which, for some people, they might not like that. They might like the freedom that comes with, Final Fantasy 5, 6, 7, where it's like, I can have any character do anything. However, I actually kind of find this to be useful because it makes me actually switch out the characters more often for different fights, so I can take advantage of their certain abilities that might work better for this boss fight or another. The thing that I've caught myself doing, even in the original, I would say Final Fantasy 7, 6, or any other game in the series that actually let you choose your class system or whatever, is that I would honestly end up sticking with the same 3 characters. And I would never kind of like venture off from that, because I guess it just didn't make sense to. Essentially, it's like, if it's not broke, you don't fix it, right? So like, why would I change my party at all if everything I'm doing with this party always works and I never have to worry? However, this battle system in this game doesn't have its, it doesn't go without its flaws. So the trans system is something that is a big point of contention. It's hard to, it helps because it fits the game thematically. Everyone knows that, and I think that's something that's really prevalent in this game. Especially when you get towards the end, they really use the idea of trance really well. However, they just needed a way to let you hold your trance for this battle or the next battle. That's all they needed to do. Hopefully, if they make a remake, they fix something like this. I think that would be great. I do, however, really like the way that you learn certain abilities by holding equipment. The reason why I like this is because in any other RPG, once you have a sword that's stronger than your other sword, unless it has a special ability, you usually stick with the sword that's going to be stronger, for example. In Final Fantasy IX, what makes this game really, really unique is that there is still value on holding that older equipment. And the value comes from, like, if I hold this equipment and if I master this sword, I will actually get this spell or this ability or something that I could add on to my character that actually helps them in battle. Once I take out this sword, once they fully master it, I can go to the next sword and continue learning abilities that way. Very similar to materia, but I found it really cool for that to be attached to a weapon. I feel like it really added a lot to the game, to the gameplay, and it really added a sense of accomplishment once you could move on to your next sword. Like, not only were you stronger, but you had all these other abilities that you can now use. And I would say that there are honestly some things that, I would say mini games are not something I love in this game. However, Tetramaster exists. It's just there. I wouldn't say anything bad or good about it. I don't love it, but I don't hate it because it's only recommended for one part of the story, and I could just load the save file and get the right, I could get lucky. I don't know what I'm doing in that game, but every time I've played Tetramaster for that one part of the game, personally, I've always won, just because I'm playing around with stuff, whatever. But other mini games like Chocobo Hot and Cold, I don't love. Some people love that game. I love the music for it, but I hate just the hot and cold stuff. It's not my favorite. However, looking for stuff afterwards on the map, once you get the map from Chocobo Hot and Cold, there was this mini game where it would allow you to look for treasure in the world map. That was cool. And it allowed you to look through the world map and kind of look at certain things. However, there were certain things where it just showed an ocean, and that kind of made it hard to look for treasure, because I'm like, this all looks the same. But other than those little bits of a frustration, I found that part of the minigame really fun. I will say the other thing finally about the gameplay is that the battle speed is slow, especially if you're playing the original. So if you do have a chance to play the remaster, I would highly recommend it because you could speed up battles that way. And in the remaster, you have the option to use cheat codes and make your characters invincible. However, that does ruin the fun in the game. I would probably not use those, but I would definitely use the speed up feature for sure. But you play however you want. Another thing I want to talk about really quickly is the soundtrack for Final Fantasy IX. I've said this in the past. Final Fantasy IX is my favorite Final Fantasy. It's one of my favorite games. Does not have my most favorite soundtrack. The soundtrack is not bad at all. The soundtrack is wonderful. I just don't really listen to a lot of tracks outside of the game. However, when you're playing the game, every song fits the game, everything. So there's not a song I don't like per se. There's just songs that I'm not going to listen to and bump in my car. A few battle tracks are really good, and probably those I would. And there's definitely some standouts, that they play in Final Fantasy concerts. So Melodies of Life and You're Not Alone. And the world map themes are very atmospheric. I find the final world map theme to be very, very overlooked. And it's one of my favorites actually too. There's a lot of great great music in this game. Frontier Village Dolly, I've covered that song before. If you guys didn't know, I have another channel where I make music and cover video game music as well, and one of the songs I covered and made lyrics for was Frontier Village Dolly, because it's just one of my favorite town themes in like gaming. But other than those, like, I don't really remember all the songs. Uematsu, this was Uematsu's last Final Fantasy game where he created the whole entire soundtrack by himself. And I think that's really impressive. However, yikes, that put a toll on him, because after this game, you know, after the 100+ tracks he made for this game, he just did not write music for a whole score afterwards. It just took a lot out of him, and you can kind of tell. But every song in this game just hits, so totally fine with that. So when I think about why this game still resonates with me, Final Fantasy IX is really timeless. It's not just a trend that everyone wants this game to come out. It's the good storytelling that's in this game, the way that the story is told, the message of the game, the themes, the world that you explore. The battles are fun, even with the slight frustrations I have with some of the battle system stuff. This game is not perfect, but for me, when I think about JRPGs, this is my second favorite one. My first one being Chrono Trigger, but my second favorite JRPG is Final Fantasy IX. I guess I'm an old head in that way. There's a lot of new JRPGs that I like too, so don't get me wrong, and some of them are some of my favorite games of all time, but those two games just have a message that mean a lot to me, and Final Fantasy IX is just a game that means the world to me because of that. It's emotional, moments still hit hard, and another thing I always like to mention about this game is that it's really funny, but the jokes are not there just to be funny. Like, the jokes lead to something for the story, and it's just masterful storytelling the way they do this. One podcast I'm actually watching that I would encourage you guys to watch is actually one of my favorite YouTube channels, Resonant Arc. They are doing a deep dive, and they're doing like a whole podcast series about their playthrough through this game, and I found it really enjoyable to watch. Now, I'm not going to do that, but I feel like they give really good insight of the game, and I think if you want to essentially like get a deep dive and play through the game with somebody and understand the game a lot more, I honestly think playing through the game right now with them is like, this is the best time to do it. Like right before the remake comes out, like it's going to be very exciting. So I actually, you know, if you want, I would recommend it. I would highly recommend watching that podcast series and playing along with them if you've never played Final Fantasy IX before. And if you have, I still think it's great to listen to. Now, let me quickly talk about the potential remake for this game and kind of some hopes I have for it. One is that I hope that people still go back and experience the original. I don't say that with every remake or remaster, but this is one of those times where I just feel like this was a game of its time. The original creator is not there to remake it with Square Enix unless I'm proven wrong. If they announce it and they announce Hironobu Sakaguchi came back to help remake this game, that would be insane, but most likely not going to be the case. And if that's not going to be the case, then I still think the original is worth playing, because there's a lot of himself, a lot of his writing style, a lot of his direction that I still feel is a part of the game, even though it's also directed by somebody else too. However, a lot of it is his style of Final Fantasy, which I really love. I do hope that if they do remake it, they preserve the charm and the tone and the simplicity, and they don't over modernize it as well. I feel like keeping it turn-based is going to be really incredibly important this time. FF7 you can kind of argue, because they had Dissidia and other games that were like action oriented games that they had Advent Children that kind of like, man, it just made anyone that loved FF7 like I wish I could play Final Fantasy 7 like this movie. Even if you didn't love the movie, the action in that movie was incredible. So it was one of those things that I just hope they don't over modernize it for this particular game, because it has such a special tone and feel to it. I just don't feel like it would be the right thing to do. And I really hope, speaking about FF7 Remake, that they don't make like an FF9 Remake Part 1, Part 2, Part 3. With FF7, I feel like you can do it, and I think in a lot of ways it works, and in some ways it doesn't. I don't need another story about changing fate. Final Fantasy has been doing that same story. Final Fantasy 13, let's change fate, defy the gods. I don't know what 14 is about, but 15 is also, trying to defy fate, ultimately succumbing to it, whatever. 16 is about defying the fate, fighting gods. Final Fantasy 7 originally was about, you know, life and death and, you know, the planet and just fighting to save those you love. And now it's about defying fate and fighting Sephiroth and the time god or whatever the hell, you know. I'm simplifying it. And, you know, I love Kingdom Hearts, so, you know, I like Final Fantasy 7 Remake and Rebirth, but there are some things that I feel like get lost compared to that original. And I feel like if they're gonna do FF9 and they're not gonna have the original director, the least they can do is at least stick with his original vision and not try to overcomplicate it. Those are my honest opinions, though. You know, visual enhancements, I think accessibility improvements, like maybe with the trans system, would be fine. And if they want to make the, you know, modern graphics, that's perfectly fine. But I don't think this is one of those games that needs like a complete reimagining. They can obviously take some pointers from Claire Obscure Expedition 33. On how to present an overworld and continue the game in like a format like that. But, you know, are they gonna do that? No, because if they've been developing this game for that whole time, they probably, you know, this game just came out, they can't backtrack that much. However, I really hope that they don't over modernize it if they remake it and they keep things very similar to the original. So that is my video on Final Fantasy IX. It's not just a game that I've played and I loved as a kid for nostalgia reasons. It's a game that I've replayed and it stays with me, and I get something new from it every time I play it. It's kind of like the same reason why a lot of people play certain other games in their lifetime. Some people really like playing Ocarina of Time because it takes them back to that point when they were a kid. Some people really like playing games that, you know, like Skyrim. People love playing that game because they like to role play and try a new adventure every time. But this one just helps me remind myself about living life to the fullest. And when I see the characters do it, you know, it's kind of reminding myself about that kind of stuff too. So I love Final Fantasy IX. And if you haven't played the original, whether you play it on the original PlayStation 1 version, you download a ROM, whatever you want to do, or you play the remaster version, I think that this game is absolutely worth playing in 2025, this original version or the remastered version, before you play the remake. I still absolutely recommend it. If the remake is announced, I'll definitely be playing it when it comes out, and I will have my reservations about it depending on what direction they're planning to take. But if it stays faithful to this, I know it'll be a great game too. But I still think this original one is worth playing for a bunch of reasons. And that all being said, thank you guys for watching. I hope to see you guys next time, and until then, take care.